The one position of need mentioned by Adam Peters in terms of areas to upgrade in the press conference today.
I noticed that.
That spanned almost 40 minutes. Pass rusher.
Yeah, so it's a lot of the generic. We got to get younger and faster. You're always looking to get younger and faster. Younger and faster, we mentioned that, but also pass rusher. Hard not to notice that.
It was also good to hear younger and faster
Well, yes.
a few times early in that
Grateful for that.
because they desperately need to get both. It's Victory Monday on The Fan, presented by Chiniga Mayos, a 2025 top workplace. Visit careerswithmios.com. Welcome back, Grant and Danny on The Fan, brought to you by the law firm Condori and Murad, estate planning, elder law, real estate transactions, probate admin. Their attorneys are there to protect you and your family's assets. Schedule a free consultation with their team today at kmlawyers.com, and be sure to mention us when you talk to them because they'll give you a discount. That's kmlawyers.com. I got a bunch of things to run through here. Give me some of your takeaways.
You mentioned the first one, that the only position of note was a pass rusher that it was specifically referenced. You're reminded why these guys are still so well thought of by players and culture and things like that. I know the Terry McLaurin negotiation is kind of a black mark for a lot of people when it comes to Peters, this regime, et cetera, because it dragged out for so long. They ultimately won that, if you care about that sort of thing. But that's neither here nor there. It's we're going to listen to everybody. We're going to make everybody feel heard. Voice at the table, place at the table. I mean, think back to Peters. I just want to stop and make sure I thank this scout and this guy and this person who makes the food. We're going to meet every member of the kitchen staff, et cetera. When we start doing this thing culturally, you feel like that's maybe a bigger impact than picking a player versus not. I'm just reminded of that kind of throughout. The last thing I would say, and before I turn it back over to you, is I think there was a chance to be very effusive in praise for the coordinators when there were sort of general questions about building a staff and maybe specific to Kingsbury, and they passed on that opportunity. I thought that was very interesting. That's for both guys that were up there. You could have gone, even if you don't mean it, it could have been a great chance to just, no, let's diffuse all this. We love this guy. This game's amazing. He's a genius. That didn't happen. I just thought that was noteworthy.
So we said going into the presser, there's going to be a lot of things that you don't get answers on or a lot of things that aren't said, but that can be telling and revealing too. I think what isn't said sometimes is the answer. And one of the very first questions of the press conference, I think it was question 3 overall, Dan Quinn was asked what he thought about Cliff Kingsbury's 2025 season. He said that they were going to dive into the performance of all their coordinators and all their coaches. And he said that they want to dig deeper in the days ahead on the evaluation. That was the answer. He did not praise, to your point, Cliff Kingsbury. He did not say anything positive at all. He did not back him. He did not endorse him. If you wanted to do that, you would have done that. Especially, by the way, they know that question's coming. It's going to be one of the first questions asked. They know about the report that's out there. If you don't like the report, if you don't agree with the report, if you're not actually at odds, if nobody's butting heads, if you're not actually going to fire this guy, you might even take the report on head on. But when you're asked about Kingsbury's performance with the backdrop of 48 or 72 hours having gone by since The Athletic nationally made it a story that you might fire Cliff Kingsbury, your answer is going to be dissected. It's really, really important how you handle that. And to say we're going to look into how Cliff performs so this doesn't happen again, we're going to dig deeper on our evaluation in the days ahead, but not to say Cliff's had a heck of a 2 years or we like how he's brought along Jaden Daniels or what an amazing 2024 he had, and we know that's in him. Nothing.
There was a great chance to do that. The door was wide open. You could have walked through it.
That silence in terms of an endorsement or praise or any type of support was deafening to me. That was very, very noticeable.
Yeah, that was kind of the thing that headlines my list. The rest, I'm looking for backdrop, context. As you said, sometimes the best answer that we're getting, the most intuitive point or something that's your takeaway isn't what's actually said, but it's specifically what's omitted. You've seen what it looks like the other way, where it's like, yeah, I don't know where that you could say, I don't know where that came from, or yeah, we love Cliff, or we think Cliff does an outstanding job. We love his work ethic, love the relationship that he has with the quarterbacks. We think he did a lot with a little this year with all the injuries and stuff that happened. You don't want to run anyone under the bus, but that could be the theme. That didn't happen. It was we're going to look at everything. Oh, okay. Because the implication was nothing went well.
Adam Peters on what needs to be fixed about the Commanders roster. He said, quote, health played a big part. certainly wasn't close to the only part. Staying healthy is going to be a big deal. So his number one reason for the season was health, which people can get upset about, but I think that's perfectly reasonable
Yeah,
as
for sure.
the biggest piece of the pie, as long as they're not saying that was the end all be all. And he didn't. He said the opposite. He said it wasn't the only thing that happened here. He went on to say there are certainly a few spots where we can improve and get young, fast, explosive talent. That's when he was asked, doubling down. I think it was David Aldridge of The Athletic with a good follow up question. Specifically on defense, what do you want to upgrade? Very pointed question. And it was one of the few times in the entire presser that you got a very pointed, legitimate, true, honest answer of there's a lot of spots we can look at. Another pass rusher is certainly something we'll be looking for. Also found it interesting when Liam Griffin, I believe it was, asked about the team's age. And Adam Peters brought up, yeah, a lot of people have talked about that. I think some of the conversations have been fair in that regard. He says, you're always trying to get younger and faster. That'll be a big emphasis for us this offseason. Now, I'd like to go back to a year ago to hear what he had to say. Did he mention getting younger a bunch? Did he mention getting faster a bunch? Because it should have been a priority a year ago, too.
Well, remember, we asked him about it when we spoke to him about the age, right? It was the kind of, hey, we noticed this. And
that was going into training camp, though, after the roster had been built.
Right, but it was kind of the point, like, hey, you've got the oldest team in the sport. Is that something you think about? And his kind of point to us was, maybe without saying it, was, yeah, there's a bunch of reasons for that. One, you got some really good players in that group, which stood to reason coming off the NFC Championship game. And two, it's a really cheap and efficient way to build your roster. Just ask the Nationals in 2019. The whole league has moved on to guys on rookie deals, arbitration-eligible players, and you can get a middle-of-the-order bat that's going to hit home runs in the World Series for you for pittance. Like, think of a Howie Kendrick or somebody like that, right? It's a pretty good way to build a competitive team quickly. That was kind of what he said without saying it. But now, after all the injuries and you're slow and you look like you have counterpunches and you can't afford to play rookies because you have to play these veterans who you owe stuff to, I don't want to be stuck in that position again.
Another area where I thought we got a window into the Adam Peters offseason to-do list as we look back at what was the season-ending press conference this afternoon, as heard here on Grant and Danny. If you missed any part of it, go back in our 5 o'clock hour. We aired the whole thing. Peters was asked about extending Laramie Tunsil, who's got 1 year left on his deal. He said, we definitely want to get something done with him sooner rather than later. You can't say much more than that.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I guess more extreme than that is you could say, we're 100% going to get a deal done with him, whatever it takes. And now you're just giving up all your leverage, and you've just told him, send a blank check over and we'll sign it, basically. But I think to come out and say, we definitely want to get something done sooner than later, with the tone with which he said it. I mean, again, you could tell me that that's just GM speak and maybe go back and find a similar quote about Terry McLaurin at the end of last year and see how that went. But he praised him as saying he should have been in the Pro Bowl. He said he thought he was the best left tackle in the league. It also stands to reason, both in complimenting him as well as Danny, if you're Adam Peters, extending him, you gave up the 2 and the 4 as part of the package for him. One of the reasons you're light on draft picks is you traded for him. So you sure as hell better than also be willing to extend him after you give up those picks. So I don't think that's going to be an issue at all. I bet you they pay him a boatload of money.
I think so. I you just wonder where it lands, right? Does he end up as the highest paid or one of the hiest paid or highest guaranteed, or how do they structure it? Because all he's done is what he's supposed to do. I mean, it irritated me that he didn't come to OTAs, but my point all along when you do that is, that's fine, but you better be great. Well, ta-da, he was great. So pay that man his money.
Here was one surprising answer, I thought, was when Dan Quinn was asked late in the presser by Mitch Tischler about whether he'd be interested in calling his own defensive plays as the head coach DC next year, or if he would just bring in an established longtime coordinator to call plays. I thought that was a spot for Dan Quinn to come out and say, look, I want to be the head coach.
Mm-hmm.
I need to get timeouts right. I need to get challenges right. There's a lot going on game day. There's a reason that previously in Atlanta and here in Washington for a year and a half, I chose not to do it this way. I don't want to do both. But he didn't say that at all. He said basically he hasn't made that decision, that he is keeping an open mind about possibly being the coordinator, the play caller, and the head coach, and that that's something that he's going to need to get more intel on during exit interviews. He says, I want to make the right decision for the team in the moment. And the moment is coming now in the days ahead in these exit interviews. I don't know what that means. If Bobby Wagner and enough guys say, hey, we thought you did a good job, you should be the defensive play caller, if that's just what you do. But there's going to be some really good options out there. Jonathan Gannon, Raheem Morris, others. I'm just naming a couple of the guys that got fired that are longtime DCs. In Morris's case, someone that has actually worked with Dan Quinn as his assistant head coach in Atlanta for years. I don't know why he would want to put on his plate more pressure going into a gotta have it, make it, or break it year. To me, you could say maybe like if I'm going to go down with the ship, I'm going to make sure I'm doing it on my own accord.
Yep.
But I'd go the other way. Like, it's just too important right now to handle everything else. I don't need to be coordinating defense and calling plays while I'm going into a year where if I get off to a slow start, I could get fired before this thing gets sideways on me.
Yeah, it is not something that I would certainly do. But again, when you have the utmost confidence and are maybe irrationally confident in things, that maybe you would make that sort of leap, but I certainly wouldn't. I mean, just knowing how difficult it is to manage everything and get it right. And he wasn't, by the way, for the record. The manageable, controllable stuff. Does your team lead the NFL in false starts? Yes. Did you butcher timeout usage this year? Yes. Do you have at least 1 to 2 per game, usually 1 per half almost, of we couldn't get organized, we couldn't figure it out, whoopsie-daisy, timeout happens? That's not always on the head coach, but you're the guy that is in charge of it, right? So it's your obligation to fix that sort of thing. And it's the type of thing that grinds my gears. It didn't cost him any games specifically, but it's a process thing. It's a binary. It's either good or it's not, and it was not. So he needs to handle that sort of stuff. And he didn't do that. And you add on, coming up with a defensive plan. Obviously, use his mind. Has a great track record, pelts on the wall of some pretty good defense. So he should be involved in diagnosing and weighing in. I'm not saying he just sits in an office and waits to approve something with a rubber stamp check mark or something like that. But there's a big difference between being the DC and someone that weighs in on the defense.
Here's one other really interesting development, I thought. Adam Peters reiterated multiple times when coaching stuff came up that the coaching staff decisions are Dan Quinn's to make. And after the Kingsbury report, where this idea was that he and Peters are butting heads and maybe Kingsbury would be fired, I found that, again, what they choose to say, what they don't choose to say today being telling, especially based on the news that's out there in that regard. I found that compelling because in this case, Peters is saying the guys that they fire, Joe Witt, maybe Kingsbury, the guys that they hire, Jonathan Gannon, D coordinator or whatever, right. Let's say Stefanski, OC, if he doesn't get a head coaching job. Like, that's up to Dan Quinn. That's not my purview. That's his area of the team. And in so many other ways, you didn't hear that. Like, at one point, Dan Quinn even kind of put his hand on Peter's shoulder and I think said to JP Finley or somebody, he's like, we don't really have silos here. Everything we do is collaborative and together. And, we're in this thing, and I've never quite seen it done this well. Nobody does it as good as we do it in terms of, agreeing on everything or whatever. But now, in a different point of this press conference, you've got Peters going, I don't really get involved in the coaching staff stuff. That's up to Dan Quinn. I found that pretty interesting. As if to say,
meaning the dichotomy there?
Like, if Cliff Kingsbury's out, it's because Dan Quinn has decided that he's out. And by the way, Dan Quinn, who had a chance to endorse him or support him or to say that, the report wasn't good or whatever, and he didn't do any of that. That was telling.